Everyone, thank you all for joining us today. You can go to the next slide with the welcome. We are thrilled to see so many people interested in exploring this exciting opportunity. My name is Kristen Lupfer, and I'm the project manager of the ARDRAW Small Grant Program here at Policy Research. Policy Research is the program manager for ARDRAW, and we assist SSA to administer this small grant program. I'm with Laura King, the Federal Project Officer for ARDRAW at the Social Security Administration, and Laura will speak later in the webinar and introduce some other presenters from SSA. You will also hear from Margaret Lassiter, the ARDRAW Project Coordinator here at Policy Research. Next slide. This afternoon, we're going to provide you a brief overview of the ARDRAW Small Grant Program, review the details about the application process, and give you the opportunity to hear from current ARDRAW program participants, Erin McCauley and Beth ONeill. And Laura King will then take over and moderate a number of essential presentations from SSA staff on work-related factors of SSA disability determination, SSA's work incentives, real-world applications of work incentive policies, and the research and policy connections of ARDRAW. And we'll wrap up with time for Q&A. Next. Our Analyzing Relationships Between Disability, Rehabilitation, and Work is sponsored by the Social Security Administration, or SSA, and the program is managed by Policy Research. You can find information about ARDRAW and submit your application online at ardraw.policyresearchinc.org. Next slide. ARDRAW is the successor small grant program to SSA's Disability Determination Process Small Grant Program, which supported research on the disability determination process. Between 2012 and 2017, DDD funded student researchers. They successfully completed over 49 research projects. With ARDRAW, we are able to administer up to 25 yearly $10,000 stipends to graduate students for research projects focused on disability, rehabilitation, and work. The first ARDRAW cohort began in FY 2017, and SSA funded 11 projects which are currently underway. And you can see those project titles on the ARDRAW website. Second cohort, and we hope to be able to fund you this year. Application process is the same, but the list of suggested topics has expanded, which is a great thing. Next slide. ARDRAW's focus is on the relationship between disability, rehabilitation, and work, as its name indicates, but it has a significantly expanded number of identified research areas, including characteristics of disability beneficiaries, SSA's work incentive programs, workplace accommodations, vocational and other services used by SSA beneficiaries, and factors that are affecting the return to work. These factors could include research questions related to youth with disabilities, finances, education, policy, and other impacts such as technology and transportation. The full list of those suggested topics is available on the ARDRAW website, and we encourage you to definitely review that entire document. But before we move on, we'd like to take a moment to hear about how you heard about the ARDRAW Small Grant Program. We want to spread the information about this program widely and want to hear how you found us. Open a poll here in WebEx. In the kind of bottom right-hand corner of your screen is a poll question up there. You can choose one of those answers, and we'll leave this in for just a minute. I'll close the poll. So thank you all for responding to that. That'll be helpful for us to know. And I'm now going to turn it over to Margaret Lassiter, the ARDRAW Program Coordinator, to review the program details and application process. Next.
Thanks, Kristen. And welcome, everyone. We're delighted to have you on the call, and we appreciate your interest in ARDRAW. Next slide, please. Next slide. I'm going going to spend some time on what I think of the nuts and bolts of the ARDRAW program. This is for starting with eligibility criteria. ARDRAW is for full or part-time graduate students in an accredited program at the time of the award, which will be the fall semester of 2018, with an academic emphasis on employment, rehabilitation, disability, public health, economics, social work, occupational medicine, etc. You must be a U.S. citizen or a non-citizen national. And I would add here, if you have any questions about your eligibility around that criteria, please contact us directly, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. You must also have a university faculty mentor committed to assist in the research and walk you through the entire program, including a number of calls and the review of what you submit to us. Employees of the Social Security Administration are not eligible, and those receiving funds from other federal sources may not be eligible. Please discuss as your specific situation with PRI, as I mentioned, also your citizenship status. Next slide. So what happens is you complete an application packet, which is submitted online by March 1st, 2018. I'll go through how the process is viewed in just a second. Student and faculty mentors participate on quarterly calls, submit deliverables in a timely fashion, the work plan, the quarterly reports, and then find your final product, which is a 10 or 15-page final research project. Next slide, please. So as I said, the application process is all online on the ARDRAW website, and there are a lot more specific details about it there as well. The application packet includes an abstract and research proposal of 5 pages, proof of access to the data that you plan to use, IRB approval, if you don't have it already, how you plan to get it, the time frame for your IRB approval, a resume or a CV, 2 letters of recommendation emailed directly to ARDRAW@policyresearchinc.org, which is the ARDRAW web mailbox. They need to be submitted completely by March 1, and notification will be given by May 1. Go, please. The selection criteria, there's a detailed description of it in the RFA, which the request for applications, which you can access on the ARDRAW website as well. There are several levels of review. The first is that I look to ensure that the application packet is complete and its relevance to ARDRAW research objectives. I may take another closer look and provide feedback on suggested improvements to the proposal before the quote-unquote official review. And the third level of review is a review by a panel of researchers and by the Social Security Administration. We meet and determine which applications we're going to award. Next slide, please. So you're selected. What's next? So we notify you by June 1, and you will have 1 month to submit a detailed work plan. That is by June 1st. We will review your work plan. It's really to assess the feasibility of your project. Can you get it done in 1 year? We know research is a fluid thing, but we want to make sure that you've thought out all the steps to have a successful conclusion of your ARDRAW project. Upon approval, you'll receive the first installment of your award, which is $5,000. The following month, you'll have your first in a series of calls with PRI staff, you and your mentor. These quarterly calls occur in August, November, February, and May. They're generally about a half an hour each, and the fund will be a detailed review of your work plan. And then upon successful submission of your final paper, you will receive the second installment of your award. Next slide, please. So some frequently asked questions: is there a budget or reporting required? No. Can my university accept the stipend payment directly and apply it to my account? Yes. You just need to let us know that that's what you want to do. If this is a group project, will both get a stipend? That is wonderful. The answer to the question is no. One representative of the team will receive the payment. And can I pay participants in my research project with the stipend funds? Yes, you may use those stipend funds however you see fit. Next slide, please. So just as a timeline recap, the application deadline is March 1st. The award notification is May 1st. Your work plan is due June 1st, and the final project will be due June 30th, 2019. Next slide. Some tips for success. The topic we have is relevant to the very long list of suggested topics that you can find on the ARDRAW website, and that your research is feasible. That is, it can be completed in a year. You'll have enough participants in your study that you have access to the data, you have factored in time for your IRB review. Next slide, please. I'd now like to introduce two of our current ARDRAW Small Grant Program awardee. The first is Erin McCauley. Erin is a former high school Spanish teacher who is now in her second year of a joint doctoral program in policy analysis and sociology at Cornell University. Her research interests focus on the criminal justice system and the broader effects of mass imprisonment on the historically marginalized populations, such as those with disability. She uses her background as a practitioner and training in community organizing in conjunction with traditional empirical research methods to conduct applied policy-oriented research. Erin is not only, next slide please, Erin is not only a ARDRAW grant awardee, but she also received 2 DDP grant awards, so she could probably do this webinar herself. But I'd like to turn it over now to Erin.
Everyone. So I've had one ARDRAW grant, which I'm still working on now, which is purely quantitative, and then I had 2 DDP grants, one of which was mixed method, and one of which was also quantitative. I'm really open as far as the methods that people use, as long as you align your research with the goal of the program. And so a little bit about each program, because I'm kind of going to reference them as I go through my tips and what. So the grant that I got was a mixed method grant that had a focus on qualitative work, where we were working within jails, and an in-reach program that was aimed to help incarcerated adults with serious mental illness navigate that disability determination process to receive benefits. And so myself, and then I had a partner who did that project with me. We did a bunch of interviews, and we also did some very preliminary analyses of the data that program was collected. And then for my second step, my advisor had access to a data set having to do with housing. And so we evaluated a housing service intervention for families experiencing homelessness, and how different types of services and also how having a child with a disability affects outcomes. And the most recent grant, which I'm working on right now, is a descriptive analysis exploring how the relationship between disability and labor force participation is shaped by educational attainment, and that's using an existing data source that's publicly available, the American Community Survey. Slide. Thank you. As the IRB process goes, I strongly suggest talking to the IRB before you submit your proposal. My projects were different, and so the level of IRB struggle I had was quite different. The first project where I was doing qualitative interviews in jail was a very laborious process to the IRB approval, and really had to communicate with the IRB before I attempted to start the process to make sure that we could get the IRB approval in a reasonable amount of time to move forward with the project, which were. And then for the 2 projects, I didn't even really need a lot. Like I basically just got a waiver because they were using existing data, and so it will definitely vary based on the project, but it's always good to talk to them early. I could also submit early and follow up quickly, so I submitted my IRB application for all of these projects at about the same time that I submitted my application for the grant. And then think about in advance areas that might be issues. And so when I did talk to the IRB about my qualitative project, I had a list of things that I thought they may think would be problematic, and then some ideas myself about how we could solve them. I also received their ideas to kind of edit my proposal. Some tips about data collection. So for my qualitative project, that was a difficult process, and so we had to work with the jail system and then also with the program of the specific program that we were looking at. And so it's kind of art-gated, and also collecting our own data made it a much more lengthy project, and so we really had to work with it. We had to structure time very efficiently. And then for the other, it was more about kind of front-loading the work and making sure that if there were to be problems that would come up in analysis, we would have time to address them before we get too far. There's a lot of great opportunities to present your work, and so I've had the privilege of presenting at 4 conferences, my original qualitative project, and also gotten that work published in the Community Mental Health Journal. And then the second project, looking at housing and disability, I was able to present at a conference and publish that in the Disability and Health Journal. I've actually just submitted for the American Sociological Association conference this August with initial findings for my current ARDRAW grant. And so there's really great opportunities to get out and present your work, and also talk about the DD program with as many people as you can. I think I can attest myself that I hadn't a strong interest in disability before finding this grant, and it happened to align with my criminal justice interest. But the more I learned about the work that PRI does, the more that I was drawn in. So it's a great way to draw other people into our cause. Some general tips: I really suggest working with the ARDRAW team. Deborah and Margaret are amazing, and definitely if you have questions about if your project aligns with the goals, or if you're worried about navigating any part of it, reach out to them. I also really suggest plan and work with a schedule. And associated with that, I strongly suggest front-loading the work. All projects I've done, I've kind of started as soon as I heard off, so I could be ahead of my proposed work plan, so that if things come up, which they always do in research, you have time to work out and then catch up, and especially work with Deborah or Margaret if you come across problems, because they can help you make a plan. And I've always scheduled my time kind of like an hourly part-time job. Like I'll spend 5 hours each Thursday working on it. And then my suggestion is to have fun with it. So if you have a topic that you care about, it makes the whole process much more enjoyable.
Thanks, Erin. Those are wonderful tips. I should add that both Erin and Beth, our next presenter, will remain on the line so that they will be available to answer questions at the conclusion of the webinar. Next up is Beth ONeill. She's a PhD candidate graduating this May from the University of Kansas School of Social Welfare. Her research areas are health and healthcare disparities and their associated social and economic outcomes. Beth?
So thank you to Mark for asking me to be here. I'm glad I could be here to share my experience. Unlike Erin, this is the first time that I've participated in an ARDRAW or DDP type project, and I was glad that it ended up working out. I'll talk about that here in a minute. But so for my ARDRAW project, I am examining healthcare, employment, and disability for individuals with co-occurring severe mental illness and chronic health conditions. It is a quantitative study, and my primary model that I'm looking at uses structural equation modeling to determine a theoretical path model of these relationships, and it's informed by 3 different theoretical perspectives. So it's heavy in terms of the analysis procedures, but what enabled me to be able to do that within this time frame is this research is also in line with my dissertation research. I will make it clear that this is not my entire dissertation, and ARDRAW is not funding my dissertation. It is funding a project that is a piece and helps to develop my eventual dissertation. So important because it can talk with you about this, but the ARDRAW project is not, quote, dissertation funding. So that's just something to be aware of as you are applying. Next slide. Sorry. What I wanted to say was, so if you're coming to this webinar to really find out more about the project, and you're not really sure if your research interests really align with the project or not, don't assume that your project doesn't fit the priorities. So to be honest, I almost did not apply. I didn't decide to apply until about 2 weeks before the deadline. Had to go back and watch the webinars because I hadn't originally participated in them. Last year, the priority areas weren't as broad as they are this year, and because I wasn't specifically looking at disability receipts or reimbursement following disability as an outcome, I didn't think that my project fit. I felt that because area fits with the area of disability and rehabilitation and employment, I decided to go ahead and give it a try. And sure enough, they were interested, and I've obviously been very grateful for their support. However, along that, I will say, if you think your topic is somewhat outside of these suggested topics, with your proposal, make sure that you very clearly state the connection to their priorities. So why do you think that it is connected to these priorities? Because you don't spell it out for them, they aren't necessarily going to know. So be very clear in talking about the relevance of your study to what the Social Security Administration and PRI is hoping to get out of these projects. So I wanted to just remind you all, in case you hadn't known this already, that using secondary data does not make it fast or easy. So I didn't have any struggles with data collection. When you get data from a national data set, which is what I used the Medical Expenditures Panel Survey. It can be like incredibly messy. It can take a long time just to get the data prepared for analysis. So as you're working on your proposal and thinking through your timeline, estimate the amount of time that it's going to take for you to prepare your data if you are using secondary data. You don't want to run into a situation where you've waited too long to get started and all of a sudden it's a few months to get this data to even run your analysis. Touch page limits briefly. So I think there are two people in the world. There's one type of person who, when they see there's a page limit of 5 pages, they say, thank goodness, then I have to write 5 pages. And then there's the other people that say, oh my gosh, I only have 5 pages to write everything that I want to write. And I'm that latter type of person. And so I was really worried as I'm writing about how I'm going to fit everything into 5 pages. So what we need to realize was I have to get into the actual detailed nitty-gritty of every single element of the complicated quantitative analysis I was going to do. I could spend more time laying out the relevance for work and identify the type of analysis I was going to do, knowing that if there were questions or more specificity was needed, that I would be able to address that in the review process. So keep that in mind. So that kind of leads me into the review process. And I think as scholars, and if you have ever submitted anything to a peer-reviewed journal, it can be very anxiety-provoking to wait for those reviews. I just wanted to stress I was very pleasantly surprised to find the review process to be extremely helpful. All of the reviewers provided me with suggested citations or their ideas for my conceptual model and where I could locate information about that. It was very helpful, and I think my project was really enriched, and then my dissertation will be enriched as a result of their reviews. That is all that I have.
those tips were very, very helpful, I'm sure. We'll turn it over to Laura King, who is the Federal Project Officer for ARDRAW, and to introduce the presenters on the wonderful presentations and great information that SSA is going to provide us this afternoon. Laura? Hi, everyone. Stay on the line, if you would, please. We're having a little technical difficulty, as they say.
Driving policy decisions. So with that, I will introduce our first panelist. Our first panelist today is Larry Surowitz, and I'm going to let Larry get started.
I'm going to talk about work-related factors in the disability decision process. But before we talk about that, we really need to talk about and understand our statutory definition of disability. So the Social Security Act defines disability as inability to engage in any substantial gainful activity because of medically determinable impairment. And the word any is very important because, as we're going to learn, basically it's expected that if one is found to be disabled, that there are very few or no occupations that a man can perform despite impairment. So that any is very, very important. The other little statutory definition of disability is that it's expected there's a duration requirement, and the duration is either expected to last for 12 continuous months, result in death. Okay, so before we go into some of the details about how we determine whether one is disabled or not and the work-related factors we use, we need to understand one definition, and that is residual functional capacity, or RFC. Basically, an RFC is an assessment, it's a document that we use that describes the most a claimant can do on a sustained basis despite his or her limitations. So basically what it does, it describes the most he or she can do despite his or her limitations and his or her functional abilities. So let's go into a little bit about how the nitty-gritty about how we determine whether one is disabled or not. Basically, we use a 5-step, what we call a sequential evaluation process. So step 1, we determine whether the claimant is engaging in SGA. And basically, SGA is a fancy word for work. And Deb and Marcia are going to go into that in a little more detail in a few minutes. But if the claimant is working, she will be found not disabled, and we won't go through the rest of the disability process. If the claimant is not engaging in SGA or doesn't meet the threshold for SGA, we go on to step 2. And at step 2, we determine whether the claimant has a severe impairment. And that's a very low threshold to cross. Basically, if someone has a severe impairment, it means that they have an impairment that causes more than minimal work-related limitations. So if the claimant has a severe impairment, we go on to step 3. If the claimant does not have a severe impairment, we deny the case, and that's the end of the sequential evaluation process. At step 3, we determine whether the claimant meets what was one of our listings. And basically what a listing is the regulations that describe disabling impairments. Impairments in the listings are considered so severe that prevent an individual from doing any substantial gainful activity, regardless of his or her age, and that's really important because we're going to go into that, education, or work experiences. And these 3 factors, along with RFC, are the work-related factors that we consider at step 5 of the sequential evaluation process to determine whether one is disabled or not. Step 4, we compare the residual functional capacity with the way the claimant describes his or her past work. If the claimant's work is within the parameters of the RFC, we deny the claim. Then we go one step further, and we look at whether the claimant's residual functional capacity or the claimant's work as performed in the national economy is within parameters of the claimant's RFC. Once again, if it is, we deny the claim, and we don't go on to step 5. 5, we use the factors that I'm going to describe and go into to determine if the claimant can adjust to other work. These are the important work-related factors that you might be interested in your research. Let's just go over the 4 work-related factors. The first one is residual functional capacity. The second one is age. And with age, it's presumed that a person that is older can not make the adjustment to other work, and therefore they're more likely to be disabled and not be able to perform occupations in the economy. So we look at the skill level of the claimant's past work, and once again, at the lower the skill level, it's presumed that they would not be able to adjust to other work. All these are considered in combination. And then education. And education, basically the lower the level of formal education, the more likely it is that, based on our policy, that the claimant cannot adjust to other work. Once again, the consideration is when we consider these work-related factors, how these factors might limit one's ability to adjust to other work and therefore not be able to perform other work and therefore be found disabled. So let's go over the first factor a little bit, and that's once again residual functional capacity, or RFC. And basically, it's presumed that the more restrictive an RFC is, the less likely it is that a claimant can adjust to other work. And that kind of makes sense because as a RFC is more restrictive, basically it's presumed that the claimant's
Hold on, please.
Go ahead. You were muted there for a minute. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm gonna. Can you all see my slide or no?
If you say next slide, so that because we're controlling the slides.
Okay, because we can't see it on our screen here. We're on the slide called age, and it's probably like number 6.
You're on age right now. I just to it.
Okay, it's slide number 30, I guess, on your. Okay, fair.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So the four age categories we use. We lump claimants into one of these 4 age categories based, of course, on their chronological age. Once again, we assume that an older individual is less likely to adjust to other work than a younger individual. Something you may want to consider is, does research really support this hypothesis? Is it possible that a 49-year-old, for example, really may be able to adjust to other work which is other work more likely than a 20-year-old because maybe things such as maturity factors or life experiences. So, I'm not sure what research would bear, whether it's in fact true that a 49-year-old is less likely to adjust to work, and whether age necessarily is more a work-related limitation or work-related that we should consider. Do these categories make sense? We assume that a 49-year-old can just as easily adjust to work as an 18-year-old. But that's true. Are these grouped appropriately? Once again, probably other topics concerning age that are for research, but these are just things that I kind of thought of at the last minute. And then I should say specificational profile. And before we talk about a skill, we need to talk about specific vocational profile or preparation. And that's a concept that was developed by the United States Department of Labor when they created the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. And basically what the specific vocational preparation is it's the amount of elapsed time required by a typical worker to learn the techniques of a job. So we define skill as how long it takes to learn an occupation. Go on to the next slide, I'd appreciate it, which says skills. So my questions are, I think might be ripe for researcher, whether P is really a good proxy for skill, whether there's other possible things that we should consider, other possible factors that we should consider when we think about the skill. B3, this is how we lump skill. We basically divide it into unskilled work, semi-skilled work, and skilled work based on the SVP. So a skilled worker has an SVP of 1 or 2 as defined in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. A semi-skilled worker has an SVP of 3 or 4. And a skilled worker has an SVP of anywhere from 5 to 9. Something that you may want to consider or may be research. Distinctions make sense, assuming the SVP is a good proxy for skill. These distinctions make sense. The DT did not necessarily define skill, they just gave us an SVP. The thing is, we assume that one not perform an occupation at a higher level than the skill level of the job they performed in the past. But does it really make sense? I think about people who may live in economically deprived areas, and they may have not had the opportunity to work at a high skill level. But does that really mean, assuming there's no mental impairment, does that really mean that they can't perform higher skilled work? are probably other topics that you may want to consider. These are just things that I had just thought of. And the last factor that we consider, if you can go on, next slide, thank you, is education. Here are the categories that how we define education. So questions I have regarding education are people in these categories truly similar? In other words, is someone with a 7th grade education, do they have a similar challenge or a similar obstacle to adjusting to other work as someone with 11th grade education? Are they the same or are they different? Same thing maybe with some maybe as a first education and a 6th grade education. But the one that really strikes me is the person that has a 12th grade education. We have someone with a PhD into the same category as someone who has a 12th grade education. Is this really true? Does the person with a PhD have the same obstacles to adjusting to other work as one with maybe a high school diploma? The other thing I was thinking about is how one account for the quality of education provided. Basically, if somebody has a 12th grade education, they have a 12th grade education, we don't consider necessarily the quality of education that they received. And we know that probably all school districts and all schools aren't equal. Some have better outcomes than others. But does it really make a difference? Is there a statistical and practical significance between the level of education and it relates to adjusting to other work that one may receive when they receive education in a high-performing school district or a lower-performing school district? Finally, I thought about how does one account for education? Basically, somebody with a 12th education, we basically treat them, if they're in special education, the way that we treat someone who's not an intellectual disability, they meet a listing. We typically treat them the same way as someone who was special education. And does the education, this doesn't necessarily reflect their ability to adjust to other work in special education the way that it would if they were not in special education. So anyway, if you can go to the next slide, I think this might be helpful for the people possibly doing research. Everything I talked about is found in 20 CFR 404-1560, 20 CFR 404-1568. Some questions, that might be a good resource to look at. And look at these with that. That would be a good reference to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. So next up, we're going to have Deborah Courtright and Marcia Robinson. They're going to talk about working of policy here at SSA. And their presentation is quite lengthy, so I'm going to let you girls go.
Thank you. We're going to go through a lot of information really quickly, and I just want all of you to know we don't really expect you to digest this or remember. We just want you to become aware of some of our work incentive policies, and then at the end we're going to give you a resource where if you think, there was one topic they talk about I was interested in that you can go to and get some information on. But one thing I did want to address is Laura identified us all as experts, and just wanted to make sure everyone knows what an expert is, right? An expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less until they finally know absolutely everything about nothing at all. Okay, so I will not profess to be an expert, but I do have a lot of experience with our work incentives. So what exactly is a work incentive? One of the issues that we find is that many people are under the impression that once an individual becomes eligible for disability through Social Security, well, that's it. That means you're totally disabled, you can't work, you never work. If you try to work, you jeopardize losing your benefits. And that's not exactly true. We have a lot of
tolerances and a lot of programs that are designed to support people with disabilities if they want to return to work and potentially if they would like to work their off of the disability roles. So work incentives are our rules that help beneficiaries keep their benefits as they explore the work, and by using our work incentive programs, they can make more money, they can get some new skills. Larry alluded to skills in his presentation, or they can achieve greater independence. So as we go through these, some of the questions that you might want to think about when you're doing research is, one of the age-old questions we've always had, and in fact I just saw a presentation that's going to Congress, to the Hill soon, it has this question in there. We really don't know when is the best point for us to market our work incentive programs to a person with a disability. We tell them about them, and we tell them about them when they file, we tell them about them when they get awarded benefits, we tell them periodically in between, but really, when is the best time to reach out to a person and talk to them about our work incentives? Generally, after they've spent a long time applying and to become eligible for benefits, at the time of award is really not a good time to talk to them. They're too busy wondering when is that benefit going to start so I can pay my bills. So that would be an interesting time. When is a good time? Is it a year? When is a good time to reach out to individual, or should we do it periodically? That would be something that would be interesting for us to know. As we go through these topics that we're going to talk about today, are the best supports for people with disabilities. We have designed our work incentive programs in many cases in answers to what we have heard from the disabled community are barriers to them being able to go to work. And we've created programs that we were hoping would be able to help them overcome these barriers. But are they really the right supports? Is there something else or something better that we could provide? Okay, next. Before we get started into the programs themselves, I do want to explain that Social Security actually administers two different disability programs. The first one is Social Security Disability, which we often call SSDI, or in our shorthand, Title II. And this is the benefits that are provided to disabled or blind people who are insured by contributions when they work to the SSA Trust Fund. So in other words, when you work and that FICA is coming out of your paycheck, that's not just for retirement, that's also insuring you for a potential disability benefit if something would happen and you would become disabled. We have a disability program called Supplemental Security Income, SSI, or we also refer to that as Title 16. And this is a program that is for individuals who maybe never had the opportunity to pay into Social Security, maybe a young individual who never had the opportunity to work, or someone who worked at very low wages. So this program makes cash assistance payments to the aged, blind, and disabled, but there are income and resource limitations for that program. Next. Larry talked in his presentation a little bit about substantial gainful activity, and he said that we would explain it in a little more detail. So what is substantial gainful activity? So gainful activity is for our definition, is work activity someone does either as an employee or as a self-employed person. So as I said before, the conception is you can't work once you get disability benefits, and also that you can totally be unable to work even with the disability benefits, and that's not true. We do have some tolerances. So we use SGA as a threshold to determine eligibility for both the Title II and the Title 16 programs. Also, once a person becomes entitled, we use it again as a measure to determine continuing disability for our SSDI or Title II beneficiaries. We do something different for our SSI beneficiaries. The SGA threshold this year for 2018 is 1,180 for a non-blind person and 1,970 for a blind person. In other words, if someone is only able to work at $500 a month, they could come in and apply for a disability benefit and potentially be awarded, or if they're receiving a disability check and they're working, they can make some money and not have to worry about losing their benefits. So that is the measure we use for both programs to determine eligibility. Now, next thing we have, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our Title II benefits only. So say someone receives their disability through our Title II program where they had paid in their FICA taxes, and now they've gotten a check, and now some time has gone by, and the dust is settled, and they feel like they would like to try to reenter the workforce. So, and the fear would be, oh, as soon as I go to work, first I go to work, they're going to stop my check. And that would, of course, be a barrier and prevent someone from working. So we have something called the trial work period. The trial work period allows an SSI-DI beneficiary to work for 9 calendar months that don't necessarily have to be in a row, and they can make as much as they want. They can make, $1 million a month, and they'll still be able to keep their benefit check. The 9 months has to be within a 5-year period. If you worked 15 years ago for three months, and then come back and work again, you don't have just 6 months left. You have another 9 because those 3 months were more than 5 years ago. We won't look at those. For a trial work period month to be considered as a service, the individual in 2018 would need to be earning more than $850 a month. That's a little bit different than SGA, or be working more than 80 hours in self-employment. So I just told you that they could work as much as they want. Why do we have this $850 threshold? Well, that's because if it's under $850, it's not going to count as a trial work month. For individuals who maybe, work the polls and make $200 a month, we don't want them to use up a trial work month for doing something like that. If a person does, next slide, if a person does go through their trial work months, works 9 months, and then continues to work, then we next have what we call an extended period of eligibility. And basically, in a nutshell, what this is for 3 years after their trial work period, any months that they make the SG amount are over, not be entitled to a benefit check, and we would suspend that payment. Any month that they would make under the SGA amount, they would be entitled to a benefit check, and we would reinstate them. And this is something they have to apply for. All we have to know is how much were your wages for that month, and then we can adjust whether or not the benefit check goes out automatically. Okay. Benefits terminate after SGA is performed in the 36 months. But for another thing to know about this is if someone is at their 36th month and their condition has relapsed and they're no longer able to work, they're back to doing 0, we will not terminate their benefits unless they once again can work over and above SGA. Okay, so also SGA, I talked about the threshold, the money amount, but there's more to it that we look at than just the money amount. We make an SGA determination. Not only do we focus on the money amount, the earnings, we also look at their work activity, what are they doing, and we also evaluate whether they have certain items such, and we're going to define these for you in a minute, such as impairment-related work expenses, subsidy or special conditions, vacation or sick pay, or any earnings not directly related to the work activity. So in other words, we would subtract some of these money amounts before we look at SGA. You could have started out with $2,000, but some of that was because of an impairment-related work expense. We take off $500, well, then you're below SGA, and we keep you on our benefit. Okay, now I turn it over to our cohort here, Marcia, to talk a little bit about impairment-related work expenses and what they are.
Thank you, Deb. Deb previously just provided you some work incentives that mainly fall underneath the Title II SSDI program. I'm now going to focus on some work incentives that fall under both Title II and Title 16 SSA programs. First, IRWEEs. IRWEEs is the cost of certain disability-related items and services that a person needs in order to be done. They deduct this from the person's gross earnings and determine sustained gain under Title II. Can exclude a person's earned income and determine the SSI monthly payment. Some requirements of IRWEEs are items or services which enables the person to work, items or services which must be disability-related, cost items or services must be paid by an individual with disability and are not reimbursed by another source such as Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance carrier. If this must be reasonable. Some examples or example of an IRWE expense with transportation costs of a driver assistance, taxi, paratransit, special bus, or other types of transportation required because of the disability. Now, next slide should be on these and special conditions. There's another work incentive. Subsidies and special conditions. The employer may subsidize an employee with a disability paying more in wages than reasonable value or actual services performed. The is regarded as subsidy rather than earnings when making the SGA determination. Conditions are generally provided by someone other than an employer. For example, a third-party job coach paid for by a vocational rehabilitation agency. Another work incentive would be the coverage of Medicare coverage. Medicare coverage continues for at least 93 consecutive months after the TWP, which Deb explained in part of her beginning presentation. A is premium-free, 3 months, which roughly 9 months, which roughly comes about 7 years. Medicare for working disabled can be used beyond the 93 months. However, Part A is no longer premium-free. Turn it back over to Deb, so she can talk about something with dealing with benefits, generally dealing with earned income exclusion, IRWE, earned income exclusion, work expenses, and tax.
Okay. So to the next slide. We're going to talk a little bit now about the SSI Title 16 benefits. Again, they're different than the Title II because these are for the people that didn't have the opportunity to work into the system, and so it's more of a needs-based program because there are income and resource restrictions. If someone who is receiving SSI tries to work after they've become eligible for benefits, remember I said in the earlier slide, we treat them a little bit differently than looking at SGA again. What do we do for our SSI beneficiaries? Well, the first thing we do is we allow the first $65 that they earn, we don't count at all. Doesn't count, doesn't use their benefit check. Anything over that $65, we only count 50% of or half of, and the amount then reduces the benefit check they get because that check is based on need. Okay. I know the previous slide had mentioned IRWE, and IRWE, Marcia already covered. IRWE does apply to both Social Security and SSI, and it's the same parameters for both programs. Slide. I think we're in a little here. What needs to be on the student earned income exclusion slide? Next one. There we go. All right. So the student earned income exclusion is interesting. The student earned income exclusion applies to SSI beneficiaries who are under the age of 22 and who are students regularly attending school, and there's a lot done about what regularly attending school means, including homeschooling. It allows us to exclude up to $1,820 a month of any wages they make, up to $7,350 in the year this year. It generally changes every year. Now, why do we do that? Well, we want to have these young individuals have the opportunity to go to work, gain some experience, get some skills, and not worry about that benefit check being reduced, because generally, you know, that would be a barrier to someone, especially if they're living at home with their parents and their parents are depending on that benefit check to help with the household expenses. The parent might say, oh, no, don't go to work because, hey, that's going to drop your check. But the way the student gets the opportunity to go and build those skills, and you know, they can do it, you know, throughout the year or during the summer break or over Christmas holiday. So that's what that program is designed to assist younger individuals. Turn it back to Marcia real quick to talk a little bit about another program we have called the Plan to Achieve Self-Support.
And it's short pass. And this is another work incentive that falls under both the Title II and Title 16 programs. Under PASS, it allows a beneficiary to set aside wages or other income besides SSI and/or resources to pursue a work goal. Expenses can be education, vocational training, assessment technology used for employment-related purposes, or start a business. We do know the income that beneficiary sets aside under PASS when we figure the aside amount payment. For example, the person could set aside money to go to school to get specialized training for a job or start a business. Again, this is meant to help the person get the items, services, and skills needed to reach their ultimate goals. And a beneficiary can have a plan if a person wants to work, person receives SSI, or can qualify for SSI by having this plan because they are disabled and blind, and person has other income or resources to use to get a job started. Turn it back to Deb so she can discuss with us about the section 1619A and B
and
blind work expenses.
So next slide. Blind expenses. Okay. So blind work expenses is applicable only to our SSI or our needs-based beneficiaries. And it's similar to impairment-related work expenses, but it's a little bit different. In order to qualify for blind work expenses, first of all, the individual has to meet the blindness definition for Social Security, which is something that would have been determined when they're applying for benefits. And it allows a person who is blind and working to deduct not only work-related expenses, but some ordinary expenses that are normally not considered impairment-related work expenses. And examples of this would be their guide dog expenses, their taxes that they pay to work, the money, that they spend money on every day when they go to work, their transportation expenses. For impairment-related work expenses, there are qualifiers whether or not we're going to allow transportation for the blind individuals. It's generally allowable. And another difference between the impairment-related work expenses and a blind work expense is if we can use either for an individual. The blind work expense is actually counted dollar for dollar when we're determining what we're subtracting their wages before we calculate their benefit, and an impairment-related work expense is calculated 50 cents on a dollar. So it's better to go with the blind work expense. The next slide is about Section 1619A and B. Earlier, Marcia talked for our Title II beneficiaries. One of the big concerns always is if I go to work, that's fine because I got my wages that can replace that benefit check I was getting. But what I can't do out is my medical coverage. So if I lose my Medicare, that's a worry. That's why we have the extended continuation of Medicare. For SSI beneficiaries, it's the Medicaid. If I go to work and I make too much money, I'm going to work my way right off the Medicaid program, and I'm just going to quit my job because I got to have that medical coverage. So Section 1619A and 1619B basically allow an SSI beneficiary to keep their connection to Medicaid, even if they're making so much in wages and other income that we're not sending them a benefit check. What we look at is if we out those wages and did a calculation on the income that they have and the resources, would we be paying them? And if the answer to that is yes, we keep our rolls, and that way they keep their connection to the state for their Medicaid benefit. And the last thing I'm going to cover real quick is expedited reinstatement. This actually applies to both programs as well. This is a safety net for people who go to work. The concern always has been for someone who has worked their way off the rolls, okay, I've got this disability condition that's not going away. What happens if I relapse? What happens if I can't work again? It took me a year or 2 years, 3 years last time to get entitled to Social Security. I can't take that long. So expedited reinstatement allows us to, if someone within 5 years of the last time they got a benefit from us and they have worked their way off our programs because of wages, within years, if that disability stops them from being able to work, they can come back. We'll reinstate their benefits. We'll pay them 6 months right away of temporary cash benefits while we, again, though, double-check and make sure that it's the disabling condition and it meets our requirements for disability. So that's an important safety net. Over to Marcia. She's going to give you some very valuable resource information.
Thanks, Deb. I know by now you're probably saying, did I even remember what Deb told me first or based on what Marcia just presented to me? we have a resource that the agency puts together on an annual basis called Residual. It provides a general understanding about all these work incentives or work employment support we just talked briefly about. And you can acquire a copy of this Red Book on the agency's website, where you can go online and download a copy, or if you want, through the agency's website publication page, you can order to receive a copy of the Red Book. It goes into a little bit more detail and gives general information about all these employment supports that we just talked about briefly, so that you would remember what Deb and I just talked about in the last 10, 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yes, I'm sure all of our brains are mush now trying to absorb all of that, but your Red Book is a great resource. So next up is Terry Odermolen. I know she's joining us from a remote site and was having trouble with her phone earlier. Terry, are you on the line?
I am on the line. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you. All right. Well, everybody, welcome, Terry. I'm Terry. I will let you get started.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not going to take too much of your time. The slide that should be up should be the ticket work and an explanation of the ticket work program. I'm going to do really briefly, and I'm going to talk a little bit about work incentives planning and assistance, and then a little bit about why we do all this. Ticket work is a voluntary program that allows beneficiaries to seek rehabilitation services from community organizations. We have agreements with these organizations. We have very specific criteria that they have to fulfill as how we monitor them. But innovate, what do they want to do if it's going to support beneficiaries? So the goal of the Ticket to Work legislation and the goal of the Ticket to Work itself was to kind of build creativity into the rehabilitation field so that somebody with a disability could be to an employer and have a special program to help them ultimately become a permanent employee. There are all kinds of different models that employment networks use to help beneficiaries go to work. This is a voluntary program, so the beneficiary can do it. The employment network can choose to work with the beneficiary. It's completely voluntary, and the employment network can charge for services. At least not, they can't charge the beneficiary. So it is another kind of cover another arrow in the quiver. In one of those days, of various work supports that we provide. And I want to, next slide, Work Incentives Planning and Assistance is a nationwide program that we have that covers every inch of the country, our territories. Everybody has access to it. And this provides free benefit counseling for individuals who receive our benefits and are about to go to work. And benefit counseling is when a person sits down with an individual with a disability and helps them do financial planning about the effect of work on all those work incentives that Deb and Marcia just so aptly explained to you. But as you could tell from that presentation, we have them, and they're really confusing, and they're very difficult. And we're talking about very vulnerable individuals who have very, very complicated situations, because not only our programs are involved, but they may have housing subsidies, they may have food stamps, they may have Medicaid programs that aren't through the side program, but they may have attendant care services or other things, all of which could be affected, and they need to understand what's going to happen so that they don't derail their work attempt. It's all about helping people be successful and to reach their work goals. Next slide. This gives you a little bit about how to get a hold of a WIPA. We have a Ticket to Work site. It's actually choosework.ssa.gov. There's a Find Help tool, and we also have a helpline that a beneficiary can call to find out which work incentives planning and assistance project covers them. But it is this is a very valuable service. Unfortunately, we have to kind of limit who they can serve to people who are about to go to work or in the process of working, because one of our priorities in this program is kind of make sure that people won't get overpayments or have things that come up the path that make them stop working, like getting an overpayment letter from us or from the housing provider, et cetera. Next slide. Why this? Why are we asking you guys out there, you students, your grad students, and you're interested in figuring out how to do disability research? It's really important to understand the effect of our programs affects real people. Yeah, in the practice, but many years ago I worked on a teleservice program, our Teleservice Center for Social Security, and I had a woman call and complain because we changed the rounding, how rounded the difference between a supplemental security income payment and a Social Security income payment, and it cost her $1. And that $1 is my jar of peanut butter. I buy 1 jar of peanut butter every week. That's all I can afford. And I buy that jar of peanut. Now, granted, this was in the 80s, so you could buy a jar of peanut butter for $1. But policy implications have real-life impact, and very important. And Social Security is a poverty reduction program. That's our primary mission. And people, if programs and policies can be improved to help people be more successful, to help our policies be more compassionate without people or making it harder for people with disabilities to succeed, we want to know how to do that. So just remember that at the end of this is about helping people, and it's about helping people get out of poverty if at all possible. And let me pass it back to you.
Thanks so much, Terry. All right, so last but not least, we've got Erin McCauley. She's going to tell us a little bit more about connecting research and policymaking. So I'm going to let you get started.
I know last I promised I'd talk really fast since I knew you had notes, but I'll try to make it understandable. All right. Terry was a great person to precede me because the question about why do we do this? Why are we funding your research? We really need the decision makers who do the policy, allocate the money, need to know what works and what doesn't. There are about 5 areas, especially in policy. We need to know, is the policy adequate? Is it equitable? Is there policy that's guiding this program equalized across the people exposed to the program? Is your research, or does research point to a way we can simplify things? Or can we manage the workload of giving people checks, doing the benefits decisions, talking to them about the counseling Terry was just mentioning? Those are like key areas in policy that are really essential, and that we hope very much will come from your research. So I know as graduate students you know a great deal about doing research, but there are really 4 pillars that well connects your research to policy. And talk about these are concepts you know well, whether or not it's achievable, and these are questions beyond in a year. Is it, if we're thinking policy and what's good about policy or bad about policy, we want to know if we could change, can you actually carry the change off? Things you're thinking about or that your research is pointing to principled. Are there ethical questions you need to solve, and how can we actually carry this off? So you want some concreteness to it. So slides kind of go into validity, the soundness in the causal strength you're looking at. Are you really looking at the right variables for what you want or what you want to focus on? Can your design solid enough, broad enough to be generalized? Are you accurately measuring what you really wanted to measure? My example here is I was just looking at autism research, and people come up with great scales of autism, how to measure autism, but some of them measure not only autism, they flag people with any kind of serious mental illness. So when you design your research, look at your questions, look at policy implications, you want to know you're looking at the data that gets you there. Another example here is if looking, people I tried to take through these pillars was, are differences in outcomes, should we have differences in our policies for different impairment types? Because there are different return to work rates for different impairments and all of that. So you need some data collection, you need to be able to operationalize your program assumptions, and tell us whether it works or where it's likely to work. Whatever you've discovered that points you to a suggestion, a policy suggestion. And feasibility question is the heart of the matter you wanted to discuss, that governs it, and if can't, which is likely in a year, and if it's a complicated question, cast ways when you're talking about the limitations of your study, what you couldn't get to. Are there ways you can suggest how you might fill in the gaps in your own research? Well, we did find out that it is not quite equitable. There are different return to work rates for people with different impairments, but the suggestions aren't equitable. There are big ethical questions. Or we don't know enough about the experience of beneficiaries. Is some way you can suggest we contact beneficiaries, survey them? As you couldn't get done, that would help us learn more about the policy implications of what you found. There are going to be ethical questions in research, always. And saying when SSA was setting up the system to figure out how do we determine if somebody's disabled, what's the fifth step, what's the fourth step, we need to make sure that the policy is going to be available equally, apply equally, despite all these variations. So, what I was thinking about when I was preparing this is there are differences, not just types of impairment. For types of impairment, you have different ages of onset. There are different actions of recovery. I mean, people with serious mental illness recover all the time, but they may not have a upward trajectory in their recovery. There are bound to be lapses, relapses, times when they're... So all of these incentives and these ways we judge disability are all meant to be equitable, to give no one too much advantage or not enough support. So these are questions to wrestle with, because policymakers and decision makers we're going to use your research and other people's research to start down new roads or make little tweaks or completely make big changes in policy, these are questions, if you wrestle with them, this is them a step up, too. The fourth pillar I was talking about was continuous, trying to get a policy change map out of this. It overlaps with the ethics and whether or not it's feasible and all sorts of other things, because what you want to do is identify, so who are the stakeholders? We know the beneficiaries are going to be stakeholders. We know applicants for disability are going to be stakeholders. But who else? There are going to be advocacy groups who can help you or hinder making a change in certain ways. So the more you can point out to your policymakers and decision makers what else is a map of change for certain policies, the better off be, and the more likely your research can either be a stepping point for other projects, for you maybe, look at different aspects of the same different ways. So that was my, as best as I could, run through. But I want to point you to the reference here. The last two items, you can't read it if you're looking on a screen, but hopefully you can in your handouts. I used the pillars in my talk from what Rex and Hirschfield set out in their framework for derived policy implications. I found it very handy. It was totally unrelated to mental health research, which is my usual area, but their vision and their examples of how it went for them I found very useful. And these other items on here, I'm trying to pick some that focused on policy and with our data. That dealt a lot with SSA data. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Chassie. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to PRI, and we're wrapping up, or at least starting our Q&A session.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for all the presenters from SSA. That is a lot of wonderful, wonderful information. And I would remind everyone that these slides can, along with the audio recording of this webinar, can be accessed on the ARDRAW website shortly. So we would ask that we have about 5 minutes, and if you would type any question you have in the Q&A panel located underneath the participant tab, or you can ask a question by phone by raising your hand. But I think the most efficient way to do it will be to just type your question in the Q&A panel. I would also remind you that you can email questions because we have very, very little time to answer them. And it's at the third bullet to ARDRAW@policyresearchinc.org. This is the ARDRAW mailbox, and it is monitored daily. So if there are any questions, we have about just a few minutes, or if not, we can thank you for participating. I'll give you a minute. We have a question that I answered already from Melissa. Yes, I'm glad you found the information amazing, and yes, it will be accessible on the web. Okay. See any others? pertinent. So I will advance to the last slide, and which has my contact information. This is Margaret, and my colleague who keeps me in line as a full-time job is Deborah Stevens, and a link to the ARDRAW website, and once again, our email box. I would thank you all very much for this presentation, and a special thanks to the SSA presenters. They were just wonderful. So with this, Laura, unless you have anything else you'd like to add, I think we can end the call.
I think we can end the call, too.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you. You too.